Hi. I did want something to hold in my hand other than what I've got in my hand, so this is good. I was reminded earlier this evening, I actually did a TEDx talk before too. And it was a couple of years ago, and I was in the car with one of my sons, and my son asked me the question. He said, "Mom, how's your TEDx talk plan going?" And I said, it's kind of, what do I say? And he said, "Can I give you some advice?" I said, "Okay." He said, "Mom, don't tell jokes. You're terrible at telling jokes. Promise me you're not going to tell a joke." So I said, "Okay." He said, "Now, Mom, take my advice. You're really good at making people cry. So you make them cry, and then you're going to do fine." And it's true, I'm usually the one that ends up crying when I talk. Most people don't know this. Can you see what this is? It's a heart. And every time I talk, I carry the heart with me. And I'm kind of the left-handed person, or the left brain person, the one that's all emotion. So you give me all the emotions, I carry that side of things. I was really influenced by my family growing up. My dad was a pastor of a church, so he had great expectations of us kids. I'm one of 7 children. You students would have loved my dad because he never cared what grades we got. He never cared, never asked, "How are you doing?" But my dad was strict, he was demanding, he wanted us to work hard. You would have loved my dad. He wanted us children to obey. That was the must. And my parents gave me something to drink, I'm sure, because I grew up never wanting to disappoint my parents. Can you imagine? I was a really good kid. My dad worked for the poor all of his life. In fact, we were poor. I lived in a small town in New Mexico where everybody spoke Spanish or were Native American Indians. And we were the only white family in our little town. The school I went to probably had, 1st through 6th grade, probably had 100 kids in it total. But I did really well in school, but that was only because I spoke English. Nobody else did. I owe a lot to my dad because he taught me how to care about other people. But I spent many years not doing that, not paying any attention. You know, I'm 70 years old. My end game hasn't finished yet. I'm 70, I'm a mom of 7, and I have 10 grandchildren and more on the way. And I've learned a lot simply because I care about the heart. But I didn't start out that way, even though my father set a very good example for me. When I came to Hong Kong, one of the first people I met was a girl called Helen. And Helen and I became really good friends. And one day she called me on the phone and she said, "Why don't you come over to my house for coffee this morning?" I said, "Okay." So I got dressed, and I had 6 little kids at that time, so I was happy to get out of the house. So I went to her house and we sat down, and she had the South China Morning Post in her hand. And she said, "Did you read this article?" And I said, "No, I'm busy at home. What does it say?" And she says, "Well, this talks about the number of girls going across the border into China who are already 7, 8, and 9 months pregnant and having abortions." She said, "Don't you think we ought to help these girls?" I thought she was crazy. I thought, there isn't that problem in Hong Kong. And anyway, I never find a pregnant girl that needs help. What is she talking about? She said, read the article. What do you think?" So as I was looking at the article, I noticed another thin article right beside it. And the title was, "Scientists Look for Live Fetuses." Now, I don't know if you know anything about termination or not, but you don't get home free for nothing. If you are 7, 8, or 9 months pregnant, you still have to have the baby. You still have to go through pain. So this is a problem. But my friend was saying, we've got to help these girls. We've got to help these girls. So I said, well, okay, I'll help you. I'll help you help them. And so we started the idea of Mother's Choice. But Helen said to me, you know why this is so important to me? And I said, no. And she said, well, I grew up, I had an older sister. I was 14 at the time, and she was 16. And I remember my sister came home from school one day, and she went to my parents, and she said, I'm pregnant. She said, now my parents are like your parents. They were very strict. And she said, my parents were so upset. And they said, we are so ashamed of you. And you have brought really hard shame on our family. And she said, before I knew it, my sister disappeared. And she was gone for about a year. And I didn't know what happened to my sister. I was only 14 years old. So she said, eventually, my sister came back, and they had obviously sent her away. They had obviously, she had placed the baby for adoption. But she said my sister came home, and she was a different person. And she was just really sad. She said to me, you know what happened to my sister? I said, no. She said, she committed suicide. She said, that's why we have to help these girls in Hong Kong. Actually, I thought it would never happen. I thought, who wants a white girl coming into Hong Kong, even though I've been here 47 years, and helping people, how am I going to find a single pregnant girl? So the two couples decided to put an article in the newspaper saying that we were willing to help any girl who was in trouble and needed help. And I thought, well, this will take a year or two. 2 hours later, 9 o'clock in the morning, we got a phone call. And the person on the other end said, are you the people who are willing to help a girl in trouble? We had no money, we had no place, we had nothing. And we swallowed hard and we said, yes, that's us. And they said, well, we're from one of the local hospitals, and we had a girl that was brought in by a social worker last night. And she's depressed, she's very pregnant, she's very young, and she won't talk to us. Would you take her? So we swallowed hard and we said, okay. So we went to the hospital, picked up the girl, and brought her back to my friend's house, put her in bed, and nobody to help her. She was depressed. The social worker had found her hiding under a desk in one of the student libraries because she had no place to go. So we had our first girl on the first day with no experience, no money, no nothing. We had our first baby on the second day morning because she had her baby that morning. My friend and I went to the hospital. We were very excited to see the baby, and we were very proud that we were able to help a girl. And so we said to the nurse, which baby is ours? We were looking in the window, and she said, well, it's this one over here. So we said, wow, when is the baby going to find a family? And the nurse looked at us like we had asparagus coming out of our ears. And she said, what? And we said, yes, we're going to get the baby a family. When can that happen? And she said, oh, no, that doesn't happen here. This baby's going to go to one of the orphanages. So my friend and I said, orphanages? We didn't even know Hong Kong had orphanages. So we said, okay, what's the names? We're going to go visit. We spent the next couple of weeks visiting the child care homes in Hong Kong, and we decided if we're going to help save babies, they're not going to go there. So we decided almost right away to start taking care of our babies. I want to tell you about an interview I had not very long ago with one of our pregnant girls. I speak a lot about Mother's Choice, so I like to keep in the loop and talk to our girls a lot. So I said to one of the social workers, do you have a girl that would be willing to talk to me? Because I represent Mother's Choice and I want to give her viewpoint. And she said, well, actually, there is there's a girl that is saying goodbye to her baby this afternoon. Why don't you go and meet us there, and I'll ask her if she'll talk to you. So I walked into our baby care home, and I looked over in the corner, and there was this very young girl, she was 14, holding a baby, and just sitting there very quietly. And after a while, I went into one of the rooms, and the social worker brought her in, and she wasn't crying. I would have been a mess. She wasn't crying at all. And I said, is it okay if I ask you some questions? And she nodded yes. And I said, do you have a boyfriend? She said, yes, I do. But we're both really young, and you know, we're not prepared for this. And I said, well, did anybody ever talk to you about sex? She said, oh, no. Oh, no. So I was like, did you know that you could get pregnant from having sex? She said, no, I didn't know that. I said, so what did you do? How did you know? She said, well, my stomach started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I thought, then it dawned on me that I might have a baby. But she said, I just decided that it would go away, and I wouldn't tell anybody, and I wouldn't do anything, and I just kept getting larger things to wear. Said one morning, I was having breakfast, and I don't live with my parents because both of them work. So I live with my grandparents. And I was sitting at the table eating breakfast, and I noticed my grandfather looking over at me. And he's in a very loud, angry voice. He said to my grandmother, you take her to the doctor today. She said, my grandmother was fixing breakfast, and she said, why should I take her to the doctor? She has to go to school, and she's not sick. He said, I'm telling you, you take this girl to the doctor as soon as you can. So she said, my grandmother whispered to me, okay, don't go to school, we'll go visit the doctor. So they went to the doctor's office, and of course, the doctor had to tell the grandmother that she was pregnant. So I said, well, what did your grandmother say? What did they say? She said, well, they didn't say anything to me, but they called my parents and told my parents to come over and visit. So I said, well, what did your parents say? Were they mad? Because we have girls that are beaten up by their parents when they find out they're pregnant. So I said, were they mad at you? Did they hit you? What happened? And she said, no, it wasn't any of that. She said, I remember they sat me down, and my grandparents were just very quietly sitting there, and then my parents came in the door, and she said as they came in the door, it was like a dark cloud was over their heads. And she said they came in and sat down, and all my grandparents and both of my parents just sat there with their heads hanging low. She said they didn't say anything to me, they didn't know what to say. So I said, well, what did you do next? And she said, well, we found out about Mother's Choice, and so I came here. And I said, so you're saying goodbye to your baby? She said, yes, we were really young, and we can't take care of the baby. But she wasn't crying at all. But at this point, I'm like choking up. And so she said, I knew it was the best thing. And so she said, my boyfriend and I have written a letter to the baby explaining for when the baby gets older why we couldn't take care of him. And at this point, I'm about to cry. So I say, oh, you know what? I've got a meeting. I've got to go. Because I didn't want to start crying because I thought she would start crying. So I stood up and I made her stand up with me. And I put my arms around her and I said, you know what? I'm proud of you. Because you've made a really hard decision, one that is going to stay with you all of your life. And I love you because you're brave. You're brave, you're strong, you're courageous, and I know you're going to make good decisions. You see, everything is about decisions. And I just held her in my arms for a few minutes, and then I left. I went home that night, came back to work the next morning, and the social worker came to see me. And she said, you know what the girl said to me after you left? And I said, no. She said, she stood there and she said, nobody has ever told me that they loved me. And nobody has ever hugged me. And then she said all the emotions of the girl came out and she wept and wept. This makes me think always of the heart, because you can't judge anybody unless you've walked in their shoes. We judge each other so bad, and I believe in second chances for babies and for girls and for families. It's really interesting. I don't know if you know that the average age of girls, we get about 3,000 to 6,000 calls a year. The average age of our girls, you want to guess? 14. 14 years old. We get girls as young as 11, 12, 13, 14. I wonder how many of the students here are prepared to become parents if you're 14 or 15 or 12 years old. And so for me, understanding that there is a huge problem, and it's not just Hong Kong, it's all over the world, of kids who get into trouble. And it all goes down to choice. For me, in my life, I look back, I would have been the one nominated for being the biggest procrastinator, didn't get good grades in school, didn't do anything, but finding a passion for what you want to do has made all the difference, and making the choice to do the right thing. There was one other person that really affected my life, and her name was Jeanette. She had heard about us. She was a social worker supervisor in Australia. And we got a call from her, and she said, I hear that you need social workers, and I'm a social worker trainer. Can I come up and I'll give you 2 years of my life if my husband can come with me and give us a place to stay? So we said, wow, okay, why don't you come? Now Jeanette, I was scared of her. She was about this tall, and she was like an army general. Really bossy, and I felt like I had to salute her every time she came in. And she knew what she was doing, we didn't. And so she would go to the hospitals and find babies that were abandoned and all of this. But she kept coming back to our meetings. There were only 7 of us at that time, and saying, I keep seeing children in hospital that nobody cares about. And sometimes they've been there for 2, 3, 4 years old. She said, yesterday, I saw a little boy with no arms. He had been in the hospital for 3 years already, and nobody ever talks to him, nobody visits him. He just lays there in bed. She said, can't we bring him and take care of him and find a family? Now, I kind of knew this was coming, so I remember very, as if it was yesterday, I was sitting there with my arms closed, and I'm looking at the floor. And I'm thinking, she wants to bring in all these children that nobody else wants. She's going to be here for 2 years. We're going to have a room full of babies that nobody wants. And she's going to go back to Australia. And guess who's going to be left with all these babies that nobody wants? That's my inner thinking. Not a nice person is this one. I had a hard heart as opposed to a soft heart. And I remember sitting there and I was looking down at the floor because I didn't want to look at anybody, because I didn't want anybody to see that I was not on board with this at all. I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the floor. All of a sudden, I see teardrops falling on the floor. They weren't mine, they were hers. I was really impacted by that. I said, well, she's a foreign person. I didn't consider myself a foreign person. She's a foreigner. I went home and I thought, she loves those children. Wow. She loves those children. Wow. 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by. And I started realizing, you know who had a hard heart? Me. You know who had the soft heart? Her. Eventually, not long after that, we said, okay, that start bringing in children that have no hope in their life. We made a choice. I can tell you with my own self as I've grown up through the years, it's always been a choice for me. What kind of a person do I want to be? I had 6 little kids, all within 7 years. And you know, it's really easy to lose your temper. It's really easy to get frustrated. It's really easy to be really tired and never sleeping at night. And I had to make a decision at that time. What kind of a mom do I want to be? Do I want to nag? Do I want to be angry with my children? Do I want to punish them all the time? And I had already decided, I'm not going to be that kind of a mom. I want to be loving, patient, and kind. Now I had to learn how to have a soft heart for children that weren't mine. I had to be bigger than that, and it was definitely a choice. So there's a theme going with all the speakers today, and it really is not so much what kind of a job you have. It's really about loving what you do and picking out what is the most important thing. For me, I'm so lucky. You know, my mom and dad will be over 100 years old now because I'm 70. And I think they're rolling over in their graves being proud of me because they modeled this for me all those years of my growing up. And I didn't pay much attention, but I do now. And I think my mom and dad would be really proud of me. And I'm so privileged to be able to help children that nobody else wants, and girls who are desperate for somebody to love them. And it's such a privilege, and I love Hong Kong, and I love Hong Kong people for that reason. And it's just my privilege to be here tonight. Thank you very much.